And welcome again to Cottage Talk. This is our post-match show of Fulham's 2-1 loss to Bournemouth. Joining me right now is Max Cohen. In
Thanks,
this
Russ.
episode, we're going to be looking back at this, and Max, there's a lot to talk about in regards to this unfortunate loss for Fulham. Before we go on any further, as always, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. Also, please feel free to leave us a review and a rating. That helps as well. Okay. Max, we're going to start the show with one question, all right? Just 2 words and a question mark. Max?
I mean, at the end of the day, Russ, I can't be mad this season. I can't be mad. We need to have perspective as Fulham supporters.
I
We need
agree.
to have perspective. The first thing the announcer said is after kickoff is, Fulham have been assured of their Premier League survival for months now, essentially. And that is the most important thing. Now, what we're seeing now is the Silva collapse. Other sides have seen this. Other teams he's managed. It's a second half of the season downturn. It's clear. We shouldn't be losing to a team like Bournemouth. That is more than clear.
No.
But at the end of the day, they have so much more to fight for than we do. They have so much more because we've done the hard work on the early end of the season. We're safe. They're fighting for their lives. It's frustrating, of course, to lose to Bournemouth. It is. But let's remember, Scott Parker doesn't manage there anymore, right? So we're fine. But at the end of the day, we've already done our business, and we don't want to finish the season like this. No one wants this. But it's not a disaster. So, I wouldn't say mad Max, but definitely disappointed, frustrated Max. I think a lot of fans said after the FA Cup disaster, that might have been our season gone because that was something we really had to play for, something tangible to strive for. But looking at it now, what do we have to play for, really? We're not going to get Europe, let's be honest. We're likely not going to get Europe. We're just fighting for each position in the table, which is nice. When you play a team like in the relegation battle, like Bournemouth are, they have so much more at stake.
It's a good point, Max, and I want to go through this show talking about this because I want to talk about the players and also about Marco. A couple things, because I want to track back and talk a little bit about what you said about Silva's history in the second half of the season. It's a very good point, and I want to talk about that. But before I do that, I want to get back and talk about raising your game when you're facing a team, Max. This is where I want to go on this because I've seen the commentary that Fulham are on the beach, right? You've seen it. If you go on Twitter, you could see it, that this is the thoughts of some of the Fulham supporters. I disagree with that because if they were fully on the beach, they wouldn't have played so well in the first half. So that's where I'm going on that. The players want to play. The issue that they have is, can they sustain it for 90 minutes? This goes back to maybe a potential Bielsa effect. We have a very small squad. Are they tiring out in the second half? Are they not adjusting to what the other team is doing? Are they not raising their game when the other team raises their game? Because Bournemouth were in my opinion, they were second best in the first half. They came into the match in probably the last 15 minutes, but Fulham dominated the play. Let's call it what it is. So they get to halftime, they make the adjustments, the manager makes the adjustments, and the game changes. And they also raise their game. When you're facing a team like Bournemouth, who has everything to play for, and Fulham, as you just mentioned, when you look at the table, really don't have that threat, you have to match their intensity. Max, Fulham did not match their intensity, and that's something that they're going to have to do moving forward. And I think this is something that we're going to have to really look at. They're going to be playing West Ham. West Ham are on right now as we speak. They are winning at halftime while we record this. So they're going to have to raise their game because they're going to be facing so many teams in the bottom half of the table. And I think all of us want Fulham to win matches. And I was hoping that the situation at Manchester United would galvanize them, bring the team together, and that they would be able to raise their game. I think you saw that in the first half. The problem was Bournemouth were able to counteract that in the second half with substitutions and raising their game. They're going to have to do it for 90 minutes max. So let's just start there. Your thoughts on being able to match the intensity?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult because we saw an onslaught second half from Bournemouth, and we have to give them credit. They fought their way back into this match. It's not often teams down at the bottom have that ability after an early goal goes in, like Pereira scored, to get back in it. But they did. They did. Time and time again, they threw numbers at us going forward. And you look at their goals. I mean, the first goal is a wonder goal. And the second goal is just positive attacking play followed by someone who wanted it more,
Right.
Solanke just wanted it more than Robinson. That's simple. And we have to remember, we're missing Mitrovic, missing the talisman, missing Willian, who arguably is one of our best players. Second half just felt like it missing that oomph, missing that, as you mentioned, intensity. I think that will come when some of those players come back. But also, I think there has to be some sort of rallying cry from Silva. It just looked like at times in the second half we were kind of rudderless, missing a leader. And I think that's when the on the beach mentality starts to come through. It just doesn't seem like the same. The stakes just seem lower. I don't know, because how else can you explain what happened? We're a better side than Bournemouth. We know that.
We are. We're a
But it
better
didn't
side,
show.
but right. But let's now talk about the other part of this that you started the show with. The situation with Silva. We saw it last season. The team faded in the second half of the season. And I know I brought this up and others have brought this up to what happened to Leeds United with Bielsa. Very small squad, just plays a certain amount of players. It's a different situation. It's a different style. But they faded. Fulham faded in the second half of the season. We're kind of seeing that. Are the players tired, Max? Is that why we're only seeing a 45-minute really good effort in the second half? They're just not able to sustain it. Is that it? Or is it about the opponent? I mean, there's so many things to this because for the majority of the match against Manchester United, they were on top of it. So why were they not tired against Manchester United?
Yeah,
I'm just bringing all these other situations to the table. What are your thoughts about all of that?
The fatigue is interesting because on one hand, they just came after an international break.
Right.
And honestly, Fulham never really play well after international breaks. I think we've seen that for years now. We can always say that. So I think the players who are out on international assignment have a right to come back feeling fatigued because they're traveling. But then the players who were here, who weren't part of the national teams, haven't played a match, have just been training for 2 weeks, they should be raring to go. Yep. They should be perfectly ready. So maybe it's a mixture of that stuff. But I do think generally, if you look at over the arch of the season, Silva has very defined starting 11. And the Bielsa effect is different, I think, a little bit because the way Bielsa plays is just requiring so much of his players. But I see the argument, the more you play with a small squad, with a pretty definitive 11, as the season goes on, the wear and tear of the season takes its toll. But again, we had such a great first half of the season. Now what's happening now, we're not going to get relegated.
No.
So what's happening now can be frustrating, but it won't ever affect the main goal of the season, which is to stay up. But we have to have higher ambitions. I agree.
Yep.
But I think at the end of each conversation, we can be frustrated, we can be disappointed, but we have to remember what Silva did in the first half of the season was nothing short of a miracle. And maybe is it inevitable, Russ, that we come back down to some sort of reality?
Well, the numbers would suggest that, because if you look at the data suggests that we should be falling back based on all of the stats. So maybe this is the natural situation with who Fulham really are, that maybe it was a false position, but only time will tell by the end of the season. That doesn't mean that they should be just not giving 150% because the fans deserve it. I'm not saying that they didn't in this match. I'm just saying that I don't think that they matched the intensity in the second half of Bournemouth, because I think they're on paper the better side. Bournemouth are not that bad a side, Max, but I just don't know if they matched. I don't think that they did the intensity. And I think that was the difference in the second half, along with the changes from the manager. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but you brought something up. So let's talk about this now. How much did Fulham miss Mitro and Willian in this match? I think both. I've said this on my 5 takeaways. I think Fulham missed Willian a lot because I think it affects Anthony Robinson, that partnership. Nothing against Manor Solomon. I don't think they have that kind of relationship that Willian and Robinson have. And Willian has more experience to really help Jedi with his duties, being also a coach on the pitch. So how much do you think Fulham missed Mitro and Willian? I think they missed them both significantly.
100%. I mean, you take your best winger and your best striker out of a match, you're going to suffer. So that's something I think is clear. I think you made a really good point about the partnership. That's missing between Robinson and Solomon just because they haven't played together that much. And Vinicius is not Mitrovic. We know that.
Yep.
But a lot of times during the match, I think players seem to treat him the same in terms of how they play the hold-up play. This is talked about in the broadcast that
Yep.
Vinicius isn't just a pure target man like Mitro is. And instead of kind of staying still, he wants to make it run in behind or be a bit more mobile when his back's to goal. But the players are playing him balls right to his feet, expect him to be like Mitro and then just hold the defender off his back. And he doesn't do that. His finishing isn't as comfortable. I think we saw at the end of the match there when Solomon put a good ball into him, he just kind of scuffed it. I do feel for him just because when you get these small opportunities and you're not playing week in, week out, you're not sharp. But it is tough. And we miss both of them massively. I think you're right. We miss more, though, because if you remember the United match, I think he had his best match of the season, arguably.
Fantastic.
And he's fantastic. At what, 33, 34, 35 years of age, he's sprinting the fastest player on the pitch, leading every single counterattack. They couldn't get anywhere near him. And I think we did miss that yesterday.
I totally agree with that, Max. That's why I wanted to bring up both players, because Vinicius isn't going to be able to do what Mitro can do, and that hurts to an extent. But I think in watching this match, I think Fulham really missed Willian, and it's just something to look at. And this is not a slight on Manor Solomon. I just think you're talking about different types of players, but Willian just has all of that experience that Manor Solomon doesn't have at this point. And I actually like Manor Solomon coming off the bench, to be honest with you. I think maybe that should be his role moving forward, because I like Bobby Decordova-Reid on the right. You could make the argument, Max, that you could play them both, Willian and Manor Solomon, but I like his role coming off the bench.
Yeah, but good to remember, Solomon also he didn't have the assist, but he played a huge role in our goal on the left wing. It was his run, which allowed the ball to come into the box and let Harrison Reed set up Pereira. So
yeah, that's true.
He didn't have his best match, but I think he still played well in stretches, and he had that major goal involvement.
Okay, very good. All right. We do have some comments. I'm going to be sharing a few of them during the show. I'm going to share this from our friend Black, White, and Fred. To be fair to Bournemouth, they have a decent home record of late with decent results against Liverpool and Newcastle. We looked good in the first half, but Bournemouth rallied for the second. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that, Max. They changed the game in the second half. We'll talk about that. The substitutions definitely changed the match, but they were definitely the better side. I also want to share this comment from Steve with you, one of our co-hosts. Steve hasn't been on in a while, but I'm curious where he's going on this. Steve shares, if we ended on 39 points, which we won't, would that be enough? And I don't know if Steve means, would that be enough to stay up? I've actually seen suggestions that Fulham are not safe right now. And I totally disagree with that. They are safe. They're absolutely safe. They're not going to be dragged into any relegation battle. They're just not. They're not going to be. But is that enough? Is 39 enough? No, Max. 39 is not enough. They should be looking for the mid-50s. They should be breaking their own record in the Premier League, Max.
Yes, I think that's the right mentality. 100%. We can't be content with losing every match. Then, of course, not. I think it's a good point by Steve, because it's a good rhetorical question, because of course everyone says no, but then I think the way I opened the show is kind of saying we've done so well, let's remember that. But
exactly,
we can't have that tarnished by a collapse, because no one likes that. It leaves a sour taste in your mouth. And I wouldn't say that happened last season, because we're still top of the league and champions, but it was closer than you would have liked it to be.
It absolutely was.
And I think we want to remain in the top half conversation. I'm not saying we have to be top half. That'll be nice, but we don't want to slip into the 13, 14, 15, that range, which again, I mean, it's a congested league at the moment. It's not out of the question if we continue this run of poor form that we're in the outside looking in. I mean, looking at the table, we have 39, and then it is 38 to Chelsea. So, and then it's third Palace of 30. So that's a big buffer. We want to be 11th minimum. When you read the stats out like that, if we let Palace catch up to us, we're now 9 points behind us. That should be enough. We should not be dropping below 11th. Let's say that as a marker. The marker is 11th, because it is really packed. I mean, it's us, Chelsea, Villa, Liverpool, Brentford, Brighton within 5 points of each other. And that goes all the way up to 6.
Exactly. And we could be anywhere in that mix, Max.
But we don't want to go. We don't want to join the bottom of the table.
No, and I don't see that happening, as I've said to my friend, yesterday, I don't see this collapse to, say, 14th. I don't see that. I think that would be extremely difficult, especially the situation with all those teams at the bottom. They're going to be taking points off of each other. It's just going to be very difficult for Fulham to get further back than 11th. And 11th could be probably the worst case scenario. And that might be what they end up with. I don't think that is going to be what's going to happen, but we shall see, my friend. All right, let's talk a little bit about Marco Silva. Now, we can criticize the players, which we should do, Max. And I want to start off by saying there's no other coach I want to have at Fulham Football Club than Marco Silva. Roy Hodgson's the best coach I've seen since I've been following Fulham, but Marco is right up there with him, in my opinion, right up there with him, absolutely right up there with him. But I think it's fair to criticize him. So let's start here. Can we criticize Marco Silva for his decisions in this match? Let's just start with that topic, and then I'm going to follow that up by asking the question, was he outcoached in this match by Gary O'Neill? So is it okay for us to criticize? Because I don't see enough pointing any types of fingers at Marco Silva for some of the decisions. We're talking when they adjust in the first half after 30 minutes, Max, they decide a tactical change to start pressing us. And I don't see any changes from Fulham except that we look more nervous on the ball. When we are under pressure, this happens a lot. We have not been able to figure out how to deal with teams that press us. And then, of course, the substitutions by Bournemouth at the beginning of the half changed the match. And Marco waited until the 69th minute to make a tactical change, to make substitutions. So I think it's fair to criticize some of these decisions, Max. Your thoughts?
Totally fair. I think the big decision you alluded to is the substitution issue. It's something we talk about a lot on the show. You don't want to be reactive. You want to be proactive. Bournemouth
Has he ever been proactive?
Yeah.
I've never seen him be proactive.
Well, no, he's not a coach who likes to take massive risks with his subs for the most part. He picks the 11 and he likes to stick with them for as long as possible. That's been the trend. But when you have a double switch on halftime like they did, I mean, Tavernier came in and scored right away, and Christie set up the second goal, essentially. So
exactly.
The substitution in Bournemouth worked to a T, and then you wait to the 69th minute, as you mentioned, Kearney, Dan James coming in, and then the other ones, they're on far too late to make an impact.
Right.
Wilson, Cedric, and Lukic, final 10 minutes, nothing really happening there, but it was frustrating. I think it was clear we need a shake-up in the midfield and out wide. Putting Kearney earlier, I know he hasn't played in a while, but he's someone who earlier in the season was the guy who changed the match coming off the bench. But I say 20 minutes, it's better than nothing, but it's not a great amount of time to change the match, especially as you saw the tide was turning.
Well,
and then
that's
Dan
the point,
James.
Max. I'm sorry to butt in, and again, people have said don't butt in when someone's talking, but this is a crucial point that I'm curious your view on because it's very good here. So it was fairly obvious, Max, that the substitutions worked really well with Tavernier and Christie for Bournemouth to begin the second half. Why didn't he make the change so much sooner? Now, I know the conventional wisdom is around the 60th minute, but if you're seeing something that is really affecting you, why do you have to wait to the 60th minute? Marco waited to the 69th minute. He should have done this much sooner.
I agree. And we can't really get inside his mind because we don't know. But I do think his philosophy, I wouldn't call it stubborn, but I'd call it more methodical. And he trusts the 11, which he wants to put out. Like he's someone I think he really believes that the starting 11 is the core group of players. I'll give them as long as I can to succeed. And I'm not going to chop and change, even if he sees maybe a situation like we saw yesterday when there was a sea change in there, essentially, a massive swing from a team who we bossed in the first half an hour to a team who was bossing us.
Right.
But I also think you look at the bench and it's not like there's an amazing answer. It's not like Kearney's the one we talked about, sure, but
right.
It's not like there's one player like, oh, he could have changed the game and solved all our issues. I do think we're looking a little bit light at the moment.
Okay. Let me ask you this decision. He took off Tete. Tete, I thought, was horrible in this match. Tavernier just ripped him a new one. Let's just call it what it is. He takes him off late in the match. what an indictment it is to take him off that late in the match, Max. I'm curious your thoughts on that. If he thought that Tavernier was taking advantage of Tete to that point, why didn't he do it sooner? Because it was self-evident so much earlier. That second half, he destroyed him.
Totally. Yeah, I think yeah, you could see it that way, that he took him off at all is an insult to Tete, right? Because as we were talking about, he loves his 11, but as you
Right.
saw, Cedric there hasn't gotten any game time, and he said, "Let me just send a message and say, hey, remember there's this, Arsenal loanee on the bench. Let's not forget that you have to keep continuing playing at a high standard, or else Cedric's going to come in." So I think that was maybe he's trying to send a message to Tete there.
Okay, very good there, Max. So let me ask you, do you think Marco was outcoached? Because I actually think he was.
Yeah, I mean, we lost the match. Simple as. We lost the match to a worse team. Listen, I think, good points in the comments. Bournemouth have had decent results as of late. They're
Yes.
fighting for something. The squad isn't terrible. All true. But we are a better team. We're a better team, plain and simple. And when a better team loses to the team struggling, I think that has to do in a large part to the management. And at halftime, what did Silla say to the players? Not sure. What did Gary O'Neill say to the players? We don't know either, but it clearly worked. It clearly was a galvanizing message, a tactical message too, not just mental. It came out striking, and we came out on the back foot. And I think that's the halftime interval is so crucial, and we came out way behind.
Right. And that's going to be really the topic for me with you, Max. Let's talk about that second half, okay? And then we're going to break down the match because I want to know your thoughts. Why were Fulham so outplayed in that second half? What can you put it down to? Are we not giving enough credit to Bournemouth? Is it just about the substitutions? Is it about this idea that Fulham are on the beach, which I disagree with? Is it that they were not able to match the intensity? All of the above. Why were Fulham so outplayed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is all of the above. We also have to look at the timing of the goals. I think it was fortunate for Bournemouth. The way the match went benefited them. I mean, they get a goal 5 minutes after halftime. The momentum change just from that timing is huge because you're already back on level terms and you have the whole half to press on. If we last a couple more minutes or even 10 or 15 more minutes and that goal comes later in the match, I don't think they go on to win it. But and remember, the goal was just a wonder strike. You can look at them, as you always say, Russ, moments change matches, goals change
Right.
matches. And the Tavernier goal was just a superb strike, and it gave them the belief that they could come back and win it. I think that was a really big situation. And then Fulham have their heads drop in a massive way. Fulham, when you concede a goal like that, I think that is a huge situation on your own mentality. Heads drop. You think we were so much better than this team. They score a wonder goal. And then the rest of it, I think, is intensity. There's no one in our squad who I think stepped up in a way which we needed them to. And we let Bournemouth play all over us. And there wasn't much of an attacking threat at all second half.
Okay, very good. Okay, one last topic, then we'll talk about the starting 11. And I was thinking about this, Max, because I watched this video, a tactical video that was recommended from the guys on Fulhamish that broke down how Fulham play and how they really don't change how they play at all against the big clubs and against, say, the bottom clubs. The approach is the exact same. And their idea was on this video, this tactical video, was that Fulham should change how they play a little bit against the bigger clubs, be a little bit more conservative. But in the case of this match, I think when they play against some of the big clubs, our fullbacks tend to play a little bit more defensively. I'm talking about Tete and Robinson. In this match, they were not at all, in my opinion. In fact, I think they left Ream and Diop exposed throughout the match. And I just think that I'm asking the question, were the Fulham players a little arrogant in their approach against Bournemouth, meaning that we're Fulham, we're where we are, and we're just going to keep doing what we're doing? And when they bring Tavernier on, who really before this match was really playing very well, they didn't alter how they played. Tete didn't really alter how he played. Tete has shut down wingers. He's been able to do that. Why couldn't he do it against Tavernier? And I think they were more concerned about bombing forward, Max. Was this a little arrogant?
Maybe. I think it's a decent point. I think if you want to talk about arrogance, look at Harrison Reed and the pressing that led to the first goal. He gave Tavernier so much space. He backed off him to such a huge extent that he gave him the time to have the strike. And I think that is the huge situation there, is that Tavernier had so much time to curl out in the top corner. In a different match, maybe Harrison Reed gets a lot closer. The thing about Tete, though, I'd say is I think a lot of that has to do to the international break.
Okay.
100% is that you're coming off the international break. You're not as sharp as you were. You haven't played with Fulham for a while. And I think that leads to a little bit of rust. And that's the main thing about Tete. I'm not sure if he was being as arrogant, but I just don't think he had a sharp match. I think it has to do with the 2-week break.
Okay. Fair point there, my friend. All right. Before we break down the match, let's talk about the starting 11. What were your thoughts on the starting 11? I can just say from my standpoint, it's what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, totally true. I mean, we talked about the two absences, no Mitro, no Willian, and the players who came in made sense. It was a very straightforward starting 11, no surprises.
Okay, very good. All right. Coming up next, Max and I are going to break down this match, both halves. And I'm going to ask Max the question, should we give anyone man of the match? Okay, Max, let's talk about the first half. And I want to get your thoughts on it. We'll talk about the goal and the opportunity from Anthony Robinson, because Fulham definitely had some opportunities to build on their lead. But when I look at the first half, the first 30 minutes, I thought Fulham were excellent. The passing was excellent. We heard the commentary from Tony Gale, former Fulham player, talk about how crisp Fulham's passing was. So this idea that Fulham were on the beach, blows this away, because they came out extremely strong. They came out like they did against Manchester United. So this is what's so frustrating, because for 30 minutes they dominated. However, after the 30-minute mark, all of a sudden, I noticed a change from Bournemouth, where Billing and Solanke started pressing Tim Ream and Diop. When that happened, you could see the nervousness. You could see the crispness of the passing went away, and they started coming into the match. Fulham did not have any answers for those 15 minutes, and that was actually a warning signal that when they made this tactical change to press Fulham, because I think their idea was they were going to let Fulham have the ball and beat us on the break, which they did anyways. But then they added this element to it to press Fulham. And then we see what we saw in the second half. It was really a continuation when you added those two substitutions. But for me, when you're on top 30 minutes, you get a goal, then you got to find a way to get a second goal. But I don't think they adjusted well to the tactical change from Bournemouth, Max. That's my overall thoughts in the first half, and we'll break down some key moments.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the final 15 minutes of that first half was poor because a lot of it was playing out the back, and they were just on us quickly. You touched on this earlier. We didn't have any comfort playing out the back, and that's how they got many chances. I know Ouattara hit the crossbar. It was offside, but that at the end of the first half was a major warning sign. And the levels dropped 100%. But you're right. The first 30 minutes is great. The Pereira goal, I think, was one of maybe the best goals he scored all season, just from a team passing standpoint, because he linked together so many passes. It was crisp. He found space, and it really worked together well in the grand scheme of things. And we had the ball. We had corners. We had attacking chances. Pereira had a bicycle kick at times. We played well, but the warning signs were there. The pressure was there. And with a player like Solanke and Billing, they're so tall and they can stride through defenders, and their physicality, I think, poses issues. And Bournemouth have a lot of pace, a lot of pacey players. And at the end of that half, I think you're right. We could see the signs in the second half was going to be an issue. And that's where I think you can point fingers at Silva, saying it was there. It was there to be seen. They were on the front foot. The halftime team talk needed to be altered. And as we touched on, it didn't happen.
No, it didn't happen, Max. And that to me is really the unfortunate part. We'll talk about the second half coming up, but let's talk about the opening goal, because this showed the ability of Fulham even without Mitro, because this was a real good team goal. Let's talk about that goal.
Sure. I think the main thing for me is the pass from Robinson to Solomon, I think, is excellent. And then the way Solomon broke down the line and picked out Reed. Because so many times I think you see players go to the byline and they put in a speculative cross and it just goes to no one. But he picked out Harrison Reed perfectly. Harrison Reed had the foresight to lay it off to Pereira, and the keeper didn't even move. And it was a lovely finish by Pereira. Delighted for him. He's been a great assister this season, but the scoring is also a facet of his game, and it was excellent.
Okay. So after the goal, we do have the opportunity from Anthony Robinson. Really good strike there, hits the crossbar. What were you thinking about at that point?
And at that point, we're on the front foot completely. I mean, what a strike that was by Robinson to take it first time, off the half volley. Great spin on it. We could have been 2-0 up. We could have been comfortable, but it was what you want to see after you score. We didn't just sit back and let them take it in the immediate aftermath. We pushed on for a second. That's the best part about a Silva team. I think we can agree is that we rarely settle just for a 1-0. We keep pushing. So I was feeling good. Bournemouth didn't pose much of a threat, and it seemed like we were comfortable, very comfortable.
Okay, and that's going to lead to talking a little bit about this tactical change. So they made this change, and we've seen this from Marco. Marco has always said that they're going to basically, I call it the Pittsburgh Steelers effect. They're going to do what they do. This is how Fulham play, and they rarely change how they play. They tweak it. So is there anything that Silva or the players could have done to affect when they were being pressed here? Should they maybe have gone longer? Should they maybe have put more balls through the channels with Bern Leno? What are your thoughts on this? Because Fulham have, in 2 seasons, Max, not been able to figure out how to be comfortable when they're pressed. They just haven't.
Yeah, I think we have to remember, no Mitro. So without Mitro, there's not really an outlet to play up those long balls, which we can do. So in some sense, maybe Silva his hand was forced here. He didn't want to just change it to more direct. At the end of the day, Vinicius does not hold the ball up well. I think, Showtime just commented that Vinicius cannot hold possession. It's true. If you play the ball up to him, he's not going to handle it like Mitro does. So we were shorthanded. And again, I don't want to hate too much on Vinicius, but he's not Mitrovic, and he's not really the striker this team needs because honestly, he's not a target man.
No.
He can score headed goals. We've seen that. He won the match against Chelsea. We'll never forget that. He'll always have that moment. But he's not necessarily a strong, steady number 9. He likes to run in behind more, but he's not quite an in-behind type of striker who will break the defense and has super pacey. He's not really sure what he is, in my opinion. It's kind of a mixture of the two, but he's not leaning one way or the other with any sort of passion, with any sort of certainty. So if you have a player in the middle of those two things, we need someone who knows what he is. Mitro knows what he is. If we had a really pacey, small striker who makes runs in behind, I think that would be great, but we don't have that. So that's what the issue is here.
It's a good point because as black, white, and frets, as Mitro also drops into midfield, which gives another option as well as going long and direct. And that's a very good point. Extremely good point. So maybe his hands were tied at this point because when you don't have Mitro, this goes back to the beginning of the show when we're talking about how much did Fulham miss Mitro and Willian. I think they really miss Mitro, especially with this tactical change, Max.
100%. 100%. Okay. It's a great point. The dropping in midfield, Mitro doesn't get enough credit for it, which is fair. But his balls, his delivery, he can play. We see Harry Kane do this sometimes. He can play in that role where he drops in on the center midfield and just sprays the ball. And that's one of his best attributes, and also first-time passes and everything. Vinicius doesn't have that.
No, he definitely doesn't. Okay, Max, unfortunately, we now have to talk about the second half. Here we go. So let's talk about second half, a little analysis before we break down the unfortunate 2 goals from Bournemouth here. And I want to really break down both of these. First was a wonder strike. The second one, we're really going to break down. But let's just overall talk about what happened here. So Gary O'Neill brings on Christie and Tavernier. And these 2 players changed the game. Let's just call it what it is. He makes this tactical change. It was from the second half kickoff. They were on top of it. And for me, it was very evident. And there was a warning sign with Ream clearing a ball off the line there that, here we go. There's something going on here. And they were really having a hard time dealing with it. You could see this coming a mile away, that they were going to score. I didn't see how they were going to score. I didn't see it was going to be this wonder strike. But the problem here, and I've heard this, that Fulham were sleepwalking through the second half. I think that's a little bit unfair on Bournemouth if you go there, because Bournemouth took it to Fulham and Fulham didn't react well. Like I said, Fulham came into this match. They played very well in the 30 minutes. So for me, if they were going to do that, then how could they have been on the beach? They weren't on the beach. They just did not match the intensity, as you and I talked about, Max. And unfortunately, I think that Marco didn't make substitutions quick enough to maybe potentially react and change the game back to Fulham's side here, because it was evident 5 minutes in that they were going to have a hard time with Tavernier and Christie. Both players were parts of both goals. So they completely changed the game. So give me your overall thoughts of what you watched, and then we'll break down the 2 goals and talk about it.
Yeah, it wasn't what we wanted to see. A capitulation, you could argue, on the South Coast. There wasn't a response, and that's the most frustrating thing.
Yep.
Is that even after the equalizer, there's still 40 minutes to play. It's tied. There's no reason we couldn't go out and still win the match. But you never felt like it was going to be us for some reason. And I think that's just the nature of playing a team in the bottom. They want it more than you do. And that's my main takeaway, is that Bournemouth just suffocated us the entire second half. Pressure, pressure, pressure. They got 2 well-taken goals, and we couldn't respond. And that's what I have to take away from this. And in those moments, you miss Willian, and in those moments, you miss Mitrovic. You miss your best players. Because in the games like that, the tide's going against you, but you can still count on a one moment of brilliance. And we just didn't have that from the players we normally count on. That's my main takeaway there.
There was that one opportunity, Max. You already talked about it. It was so frustrating to see Manor Solomon set up Dan James and he scuffs it.
Yep.
That was the one opportunity I can think of. But again, there aren't enough of those. And it just shows that Fulham have this lack of depth. I know we talk about it time and time again. When you're down 2 players like this, it affects your depth even more so. It's a very small team right now. It's even smaller right now. So good point by you for talking about, did we have that player out there that could really, get that goal for us? You could argue that it's Manor Solomon. You could argue, I've seen the argument, maybe Harry Wilson should have played earlier instead of Dan James, maybe. But there just isn't enough there. And it showed itself. It showed how much Fulham missed Mitro and Willian. It really showed itself in the second half. Good point by you. Okay, let's go through these. Let's talk about the first Bournemouth goal. Do we just chalk this up to a great strike by Tavernier?
Yeah, it's a great strike, but I do think Harrison Reed can get closer. I don't want to blame him because the goal was a brilliant goal. We've said that many times. All credit to Tavernier, but I just felt like he gave him too much space. And as you mentioned, Russ, Tavernier's on great form. You don't give a player who's hot that much space on the edge of the box. Now, no one expected him to curl a wonder goal in the top corner, a worldie. But you have to get a little bit tighter. That's my only gripe. But again, great goal. And again, came at the perfect time for Bournemouth. If this comes in a different situation in the match, I don't think it has big effect. But it was right after halftime, right after their wave of pressure, and boom, they got probably their best goal of the season.
Fantastic goal. It was really a fantastic goal, but I think it's a fair criticism to talk about Harrison Reed there. Good point by you. Okay, we're going to talk about this because I'm going to say this right now, and I will give Anthony Robinson a lot of credit when he deserves it, and I'm going to criticize when he deserves it. He deserves criticism here. Let's talk about the second goal. I've seen people suggest to me that potentially Bernd Leno should have done a little bit better, but you know what? Anthony Robinson should have cleared this ball, Max. I can't get around that. And I think it's an own goal. I don't know why it's not an own goal, but would you agree with me that this is a blunder by Jedi here?
Yeah, I mean, it was comical. The ball just trickled into the net, and Solanke didn't even know how to celebrate. He's like, really? It was that was that easy? I could just tap it into the empty net like that? What? I mean, it's laughable. Okay, but there are a number of things here, Russ. First of all, I think Ream gets flat-footed. Because Christie's first touch, it's a good first touch,
Yeah.
but it takes Ream out of the match completely. Completely leaves him for dead. And that sets up the strike. So I think there has to be a bit of blame there for Ream because it was just quite simple. The way Christie went by him wasn't anything special, just a burst of pace. And suddenly he has a clean shot on goal. I think you're right. Leno, that's in the danger area. It was well struck. It was low, it was hard, difficult for a keeper. But you have to do better, I think. You have to try to either parry that well wide or parry it back the way it came. But he did put it in a very dangerous area. But it is Robinson. It's 100% Robinson on the actual goal because you just have to clear that. I don't know what he was thinking. The only explanation I have is that he's facing his own goal. And he's worried if he takes a swing at that, it's an own goal. That is the only explanation I have. I don't agree with it, but come on, you have to deal with that. Yep. And again, I think that was one of the most comical goals we conceded because the ball just trickles in. Solanke just steps in front, it hits off Robinson, and everyone's kind of watching in slow motion as they score a winner. And normally when you score a winner late in the match and you're in a relegation fight, it's like a huge moment. And Solanke just kind of, he celebrated, sure, but it wasn't a massive outpouring of emotion because he knew how simple and how almost comical the goal was.
Okay. Showtime 53 says Robinson on the second goal was horrible. He tried to bracket off Solanke, but got bullied. Here's an interesting comment, and I understand where Black, White, and Fred's coming on this. Got to say, his first real error Robinson has done all season. He's been great and thinks deserves for us to let this one slide. Thoughts?
Yeah, he's had a great season. I'm not going to call for him to be dropped. Of course not, but you have to point fingers when someone has a huge error, and that's what this was. That, to be fair, Robinson has never been the strongest player. Whenever he goes up against a striker like Solanke, he's always going to be second best. This isn't anything new. It's not his strength, it's his physicality. Right. However, his positioning is excellent. One-on-one defending, on the wings, he's very good at. But I think this has been an issue for a while with him. When you get into situations in and around the 6-yard box, this is the same thing with crosses coming in. We saw that numerous times against Arsenal. He has a lot to be desired in that area. And I think if he wants to play for a top team, which he will one day because that's the way it's going, not saying
he's got things to work on, my friend. He's got issues. I think he has the potential. The thing about Jedi is loads of potential, but you just talked about some of his defensive issues. And I'll say he needs to this summer, just 1,000 balls of just crossing, just cross, work on your crossing like you wouldn't believe, because I think he can get a lot better on his crossing. I'm sure he works at it. That's one thing. If I was to give him advice, not that he would take it from me, not that he should, but I would say, really work on your crossing, but still loads of potential. He's not ready for a Big Six club. He should stick at Fulham and try to get better, in my opinion, but what do I know? Anyways, I want to share this comment because we are talking about the fullbacks, and this is what Steve Reynolds said. I want to get your thoughts on it because I noticed this as well. Wingbacks were far too advanced, leaving center backs exposed. 20 minutes, way too late to make subs. We've already talked about both of these, Max, and you could see this. You could see it coming. How many times did we see Solanke one-on-one with Tim Ream? That shouldn't be happening the way it did. It just shouldn't be happening. So who's to blame for that? Is it the player? Is it Silva? Is it both? And as we already talked about, the substitutions came way too late.
Yeah, I think the substitutions point, we've said that and we totally agree with that. The wing backs is another point you brought up, Russ. I think that's right as well. I struggle with that because I think on the flip side, I think we want to see our wing backs play attacking. We want to see our wing backs show intent and go in the attacking sense, not just sit back, but it has to be measured. And they have to understand who they're playing with in the center backs. And they know their center backs can't be exposed to every single attack because they don't have the pace that the strikers have. So everything in moderation. That's my take here. And I think that is a tactical thing from Silva. So I agree. That should be addressed.
Okay, very good. Boy, what a terrible match, my friend. We're going to end this, and I'm just going to ask the question because I've had enough talking about this because there's not really much good to take out of this, Max. So I'm just going to ask the question, should we give a man of the match for this? If you are, who would you give it to?
Probably Pereira, just because
I was thinking the same thing. It would have to go to Pereira, right?
But no one really deserves it. I think you're right. Not after this.
Let's see. This is from Showtime 53. Harry Wilson should always come in before James, and Tete was out of gas, should have been sub earlier. I agree with the latter part of that. The former part of it, I'm not so sure. I still wanted to see Dan James, but I understand where Showtime's coming on this, that for whatever reason, Harry Wilson hasn't featured much.
Yep. Leno and Harrison Reed are being floated. I think those are both also good options. Harrison Reed is actually, that's a good shout. That's a good shout in my opinion. He could also have a good case to be made because quietly he's having an excellent season. He doesn't get the plaudits that Paulinho does, but he makes the midfield tick in a big way. And he had the assists, so sure.
Do you know what's funny about Harrison Reed? I don't know if you saw the show or if we even talked about this, Max, what Eric Winalda said about Harrison Reed.
No, what'd he say?
Okay, so I was going to work, and it's funny, and I've shared this on the show, so I'll share it one more time. I was listening to Counterattack on Sirius XMFC. It was from the night before, and he just went after Harrison Reed, and he said that he's just not a Premier League player. He doesn't see him as a Premier League player. And he had a bad performance. It was a match just recently. In this match, he had a bad performance. But Eric Winalda doesn't watch Harrison Reed like we do. And it was just a bad match for him. It was without Paulinho. So he was asked to do, it was the Brentford match. So he was asked to do something that, again, it's not that he hasn't done, but he's a different player when Paulinho is there. And we've seen that. His role had changed. So now he's reverting back to his other role. And he wasn't good in that match. Eric Winalda went off on Harrison Reed saying that, I'm paraphrasing, basically asking the question, is he a Premier League player?
Yeah, well, I think we all agree on this podcast that he is. And he's been very good for us this season. So that's all there is to say about that.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, Max, great show, my friend. I really enjoyed this. And hopefully next week, unfortunately, Giannis could not join us for the show, but the three of us hopefully will be back next week to talk about a Fulham victory against West Ham. I know we all want to talk about that. So let's hope we're talking about a Fulham victory. Any final thoughts before we go, my friend?
It's always great to do the show with you, Russ. It's always great to talk after a Fulham match. Not as always great to talk after a loss, but as we always say, it's therapeutic. It gets out the anger and the disappointment. And I think looking at the table was one of my big takeaways from this conversation.
Yep.
Because we're going to face a lot of questions over the next couple months about what constitutes success in this season, because we never expected to be in this position. And I think it's a very good benchmark to say that anything below 11th will be gravely disappointing. And that is like the benchmark we need to judge Silva against, because I think if we finish 10th and above, we have to say hats off, well done, that's a success. If we drop to the point where that 9-point gap gets bridged, then we have the right to be disappointed just based on how far ahead we were. But at the end of the day, we're in the Premier League. We'll be here next season. Life's good to be a Fulham fan.
Okay. My final thoughts involve some of the positives that can come out of a match like this and some of the matches recently is that it's actually exposing some of the weaknesses that Fulham are going to have to address next season, Max. I think you'll agree with me on this. It's going to be about recruitment. It is absolutely going to be about recruitment. I wouldn't say Fulham need a complete overhaul, my friend, but they need to look at where they're weak and they need to build a deeper and more quality across the pitch. There are two players that I think are players that they cannot get rid of. That's Mitrovic. People might argue with me on that. They can't get rid of Mitrovic. And they certainly can't get rid of Paulinho because they don't have replacements for him. They need those two players. They are what Fulham are built upon. So for me, they need to find suitable players that can fill in for those two players, but they need quality around them. They need to build around these two central players, you're talking central midfield and a striker, Max. So that's where I'm going on this. It's exposing the weaknesses that Fulham have, the lack of depth, and how that they need to spend, and I'm going to say it right now, they need to spend big time, but they need to make sure that they're bringing in the right players. I'm not talking about spending a huge amount on one player. Spreading the money around and finding quality across the pitch, because there are several places where I think Fulham can upgrade for next season. That's where I'm looking at, my friend. Okay. Well, Max, it's always great to do the show with you. Thank you so much for doing it with me.
Thank you, Russ. Have a great weekend, everyone. And yeah, next weekend, we're going to come back after a win. That's what we're predicting. We'll beat West Ham.
Okay. Before we go, Emma says, man of the match, Russ and Mad Max for a great podcast. Thanks, Emma. Really appreciate that. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Cottage Talk. For my good friend here, Max Cohen, I'm Russ Goldman. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, now part of the talkSPORT Fan Network.